mention that we're expecting to see volcanic-like scenes as well, which is very interesting. We don't see too many of that.
Water,
in movies.
volcanic. Is this turning into Avatar?
Well,
Last Airbender?
That's what I was thinking. Is that I feel like each sequel maybe will explore different elements. You know.
I was gonna say this is starting to sound more like a video game.
We'll start like calling the Avatar movies by their elements. So like, the lava sequel.
Inconceivable.
Hello and welcome to Inconceivable. I'm William, and today I'm joined by Alex and Gordon.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me, guys. If you didn't know, if you're listening to this podcast, you can also check out the video version on our YouTube channel at Geek Kind. And if you're watching this, you can listen to this podcast wherever you are on your favorite music/podcast platform. So with that, let's get right into it. And for today's episode, I'm going to be talking about why there currently is no hype for the upcoming Avatar movies and why I think there should be a lot of hype for them. Okay. Especially since the first one, as of the recording of this podcast, is slated for December of 2020, which is just a year and a half from now.
You mean the first sequel?
The first sequel, yes.
Okay.
And I think, it's going to be very soon. We're going to start seeing a lot of like stuff for it, promotional materials, trailers. Mm-hmm. So we're just ahead of the curve as far as the general hype from the production team, you know. But I feel like big movies of this stature usually have a lot of hype even before that. AKA basically every Marvel movie, you know.
Yeah, well, to be fair, with Marvel movies, they come out every year, and we had Avatar, 2009? So it's been 10 years, so I feel like that's
And with that, let's briefly talk about that and what Avatar is for those who don't know or as is familiar. Alex has seen the movie. Did you see it in theaters or did you watch it on DVD?
I watched it on DVD. I watched it once, and that was years ago, but it's...
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting and entertaining to watch, but the premise is, I feel like I've seen it before in a Disney movie, so...
Yeah. And you actually haven't seen it at all, but you're familiar with most of the concepts within it.
Yeah, pretty familiar.
As Alex alluded to, the storyline is fairly familiar, and I don't think anybody, when raving about the Avatar movie, was bragging about its revolutionary story, because it was pretty simple. I would like to make the quick argument, though, that that's not always a bad thing. I think several movies have storylines that we've seen time and time again. I think what was missing from this was its own unique spin on it, you know, because it did feel not as much copy and paste, but as just like you were waiting for that one twist to separate it from the other ones as used the similar storylines, and it just didn't quite have that. But I don't think like people use that as a way to like downplay the movie as not good, but I don't think that qualifies as a reason to say the movie's not good, because it was still well executed in its plot. Even though we've seen it before, it wasn't like it replicated the same plot and then did it badly.
Okay.
So
what would you say is special about the original Avatar?
So the thing that really shines about the original Avatar is it is revolutionary in its as far as the movie's presentation goes. So for instance, I think I've mentioned it on the podcast before, Avatar single-handedly cemented 3D movies as a permanent thing and not just a fad part two. Because it was a fad back in the 80s, back when you had like the red, blue like glasses, and now we have like the real 3D technology that's a little bit different.
Well, that's even significantly post-Avatar that's been changed, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Well, the thing is that 3D was reintroduced before Avatar, obviously.
Yeah.
But then it was already on the decline, as it was only used in very gimmicky instances, and it was very tacked on and never executed correctly.
Okay.
Avatar came along, and one thing that was very unique about Avatar is that it didn't have a super impressive opening box office weekend. It had a pretty average, you know, which is strange when you look at the end result of everyone knows that Avatar being the current #1 movie for highest grossing of all time, which, let me look at the exact statistic, it grossed $2.7 billion worldwide. That is insane. That is insane.
It is.
What's the next movie on the list?
The next movie on the list, ironically, is Titanic. also produced by James Cameron, not produced, directed by James Cameron, and that came in just over $2 billion.
Okay.
So, and the original Titanic was in, I think, 1998, and Avatar 2009. And I think what's impressive is that both those movies have basically have withstanded the entire run of these, not just the Avengers movies, but the Lord of the Rings movies, the Harry Potter movies, and literally every significant movie that we've seen since 1998, which is a really, really big part of cinema. Like these past 20 years have been a really big age for movies, you know.
Now, what do you think? What do you mean when you say withstood compared to other movies exactly?
As far as grossing.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
Star Wars kind of hit it out of the park with that one, I think. I'm pretty sure it did. The Force Awakens?
Yeah, but it didn't even come close to them.
No, it went past them. Surpassed
No.
them, right?
No.
Force Awakens?
No.
Which movie
Force
was that?
Awakens was, I think, maybe top 10, but no, it didn't beat them. That is the numbers. Like, Avatar is still number 1, and Titanic is still number 2.
So I think the accolades that the Star Wars movies and the Marvel movies hold are typically how quickly they make certain milestones, but overall they don't end up beating either Titanic or Avatar in the long run.
One thing that was very I didn't do a lot of research on what made Titanic so successful in its grossing, but what made Avatar so successful is that I mentioned how when it first came out, it didn't have a really crazy opening weekend, and that's because it was mostly unknown. It wasn't a part of like a big franchise. It was like basically the only thing that was really interesting about it, other than what it looked like, was this was basically James Cameron's brainchild for the past 15 years. He wrote the script back in '95. Very similar to Star Wars, realized that the technology didn't exactly was at the place that he wanted to, and kind of set it aside. And by Star Wars, by the way, I meant when George Lucas originally wrote the storyline for Star Wars, the prequels were shelved later on, which is why they were done after the fact, because the technology was not where he wanted it to be. So James Cameron did a very similar thing. And even when they started, they still were filming the movie for, I believe they said 9 years was the amount of process it took them to film the original Avatar movie.
Okay.
So original script 95, they started filming early 2000s, well, started production of the film early 2000s, and it didn't release until 2009. That's a freaking long time for movies. These days, usually around the long end, we're usually seeing about 3 years. That's a long time for a movie, you know? We were just talking about How to Train Your Dragon 3, and obviously they weren't working on it like the entire gap. They were working on it for a longer period than most trilogies, especially animated. Animated usually gets pushed out a lot faster. So it's a more rarity thing, but honestly, I feel like the ones that we wait for tend to be the better ones.
Yeah, same as Spider-Verse. They took several years with that one in development. I think it took them like a week to
4 or 5 years.
something like that. It was pretty close.
This is the way that they're doing the sequels also bears resemblance to Lord of the Rings and how they were done, because they were all filmed together, correct? And they took a long time to make those movies and to make sure that everything was right before they released them.
I believe they started in '98, and the first one came out in 2001, and the others came out each sequential year after that.
Yeah. So that's I think that's usually a recipe for success. Obviously, you're gonna have outliers, but I feel like the ones that take their time have a much better result. Obviously, as most things are, you know.
Yeah.
It's not a surprising fact really on that one, but I think that's a good sign that, you know, like part of the reason for success as we're trying to figure out why Avatar was so special. But back to the 3D thing, I think that what made Avatar so special is that James Cameron is very obsessed with the third dimension in general. In fact, he's trying to incorporate in a lot more of technology today. In film, although his medium, he's trying to push it to other things like the medical field and things of that nature. Okay. He's very big on technology and not just film. And a big point for this movie was he filmed it with 3D in mind. And I think that makes a big difference to the movies that even today we see in 3D, where 3D is more of an afterthought.
Right.
And the difference being is that when you have 3D after the fact and not really incorporated when shooting, it is all digital, you know, and there's nothing that was filmed with 3D in mind, meaning that you're basically, it's like almost like photoshopping in a way. So like the effect is there, but it's not as natural. You know, it doesn't feel as immersive. Okay. Usually the kind of 3D movies that we see now, I saw it with Star Wars, even one of the higher production ones, it feels like you can count the layers of 3D. And instead of it feeling like you're immersed in there, it's like you can see 1, 2 layers, and then like the back layer. Like that's kind of what it feels like. And it feels more like those books that you'll have that feels like it's just kind of above the surface.
Yeah.
You know, or like the 3DS, that's a great example. It kind of feels like the 3DS effect, you know, where it's like 3D quote unquote, but not really like jumping at you. You know, it's like you can feel there's depth to it. And that's basically what 3D movies.
I never had 3D never really did anything for me just because it seems so blurry, and I don't know if it's just because I have crappy eyes or not, but just watching it, it's like it's not like it's right out there. I see different layers on top of layers. Like I see like an extra, I don't know, just like extra things, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So it's not like something that I go for really. It's just it doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah, I have to admit a certain amount of skepticism about 3D imagery in general. Just not really seeing or feeling the need to have something be that immersive, and where it's typically more expensive to see entertainment in 3D, it's kind of a non-starter for me.
It doesn't really feel like a bang to your buck, honestly, for me at least.
You don't feel like the money is added into the value, because I
can be immersed in a movie without having 3D, but 3D I feel like it's more distracting to me, honestly. Maybe just because I've watched regular movies as opposed to that, but yeah, it's just not.
No, I absolutely do agree with you. I used to, after Avatar, I was more adamant about seeing movies in 3D, only to be slowly and surely being let down by just realizing that it just wasn't done in the same fashion. I think the last movie that I saw in 3D was maybe Rogue One. It was either Rogue One or Force Awakens.
I think it was The Force Awakens.
Okay, that was a while ago. And after that, I was convinced that I got no more enjoyment out of 3D than I did 2D, which was a sad realization. You know, it's just like you want it to be cooler than it is, but just in practice, it just isn't doing it. Because when you said about the blurriness, I've been noticing that a lot more recently too, where it just doesn't feel like everything is quite in focus, and I don't know if they're trying to do that to make it more immersive as far as depth goes, but it just was more distracting than anything.
Well, you see like the trailers for 3D, and you see the characters literally coming right out of the screen or throwing something, and I don't see that at all. It's like seeing like pictures on top of each other that are spread out a little bit, and they're right in front of you, but you see like there's space behind them.
One of the best 3D movies that I saw besides Avatar was actually A Christmas Carol. That's a pretty good one.
Jim Carrey.
The Jim Carrey animated version. One, but it's like the really realistic animated one.
Yeah, it's the Polar Express sort of 3D animation.
Yeah, that 3D was really good. That was the last time I was impressed by 3D, and that was also.
I think that was motion capture.
No, there was motion capture. Yes, but I was trying to remember when that came out.
I think it was 2010.
When did Jim Carrey's A Christmas Carol come out?
A Christmas Carol came out in the United States.
2009. So ironically, around the same time. Wow.
All right.
So it came out literally just after Avatar. So yeah, I haven't been impressed by 3D movies since 2009. That's really sad.
I mean, it's better than not being impressed at all.
I mean,
which is what I have been.
Well, see, that's the thing, is that Avatar set a precedent of what 3D could actually be capable of, because there was never those moments of things being blurry. There was never those moments of like being distracted. It just felt so immersive. And I remember very distinctly one of the craziest scenes was there's this moment where you're in Pandora, and there's almost these like living like jellyfish creatures floating in the air, and it was purposely one of those moments where you're supposed to take in like all over the world, you know, and those things, like it literally felt like you were in the movie for a moment, because that was like a perfect like use for the 3D where you just felt like everywhere, you know.
It's funny that they'd have that scene as the moment to make it really realistic. Having jellyfish floating in the air, that's terrifying. It's like, am I enjoying the movie? No, I'm scared
think of
death.
Like the Nemo when you have Dory's like, you know, my jellyfish like that's like squishy, like they were like squishies, like they were
big
like
squishies that will kill you.
I remember vividly that moment being one of the cooler moments, but just in general, because there was so many flying scenes, just like, and Pandora was just such a beautifully created world that it felt so cool to be immersed by it, you know. And I was looking at some stuff of Avatar today, like 10 years later, and it really holds up, like graphically, and like especially with the motion capture of the 3. Like it compares to some of the, like it's not better, but it definitely can stand next to like recent performances like Planet of the Apes, you know, and things of those have been really pushing that technology, and it's just really impressive, you know.
Did you watch Planet of the Apes?
Part of it. I haven't finished it. I'm not a big fan of those movies, to be honest, and it's just.
But you haven't seen them. How can you not be a fan if you haven't seen them?
Because I tried, and then I was like,
With one movie?
Yeah, same thing with Transformers.
No, Transformers, like, it's completely different. It's got the name Michael Bay on it, okay?
That's just not for me, you know. But yeah, so those movies did it so well that it had people coming back for seconds and thirds because they wanted that immersive feeling, and it was a feeling that had never been quite captured in movies before, almost like it was a different medium. And week after week, it became more and more popular, especially as people came to go watch it, and then you had word of mouth of people saying, you need to go see this movie in theaters. And I think that was, like, I didn't know a friend who had seen it in theaters and not go back to see it in theaters again. Like, it was such a, like, experience that people wanted to relive, because it was, like, that well made, and, like, the 3D experience especially was so valuable. And once they did that, and of course you see the numbers behind it, now all the companies like, well, we should definitely do 3D now, because now we see the numbers behind it, we saw what they did, but they didn't want to put in the work as filming to make it as special. And I think that even though 3D is still pretty prolific within movies, I feel like the attendance of 3D is probably the smallest that it's ever been since then. I would imagine. I don't got any numbers to back that, but
it would be interesting to see some actual data on that. But
well, I'd also wonder if it's more difficult for them to do 3D if it's live action movies, because with Avatar, yes, it's live action, but most of it was CGI.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's easier for them to do it with that or not, but again, like if you're shooting with a camera and you're doing like real people, it might be a little more difficult.
I mean, they have cameras that shoot in 3D, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. They've also done, I'm trying to remember what movie did exactly, but they've done movies where they film with multiple cameras, so with better depth. Kind of like how your phone these days tends to have more than one camera on the back, and it uses that to give that bokeh effect of like the blurred background by basically getting your two cameras, as kind of like how eyesight works with your eyes. You can see depth because you have two eyes. You start to lose your depth of vision when you have one eye. So having two cameras, the phone can kind of recognize the difference of what's far and what's close because of the two lenses. But yeah, so Avatar was revolutionary. It's a technology, especially with the 3D advancements, and then especially, as everyone knows, the live performance capture elements that they did was so much more detailed and so much more revolutionary than anyone really attempted. By far the most revolutionary thing that was ever done since Lord of the Rings, with the performance for Gollum. That was the biggest thing since then. And I will say that Lord of the Rings is starting to age now. I think we're getting to that point where I see it, and it's like the motion capture, like you can see moments where it doesn't seem like it's really there, like kind of almost floaty in certain scenes. Avatar, I feel like, has very yet to hit that point, and I think one thing that kind of goes in Avatar's favor, to be fair, is that the majority of it is CGI when they're in Pandora, whereas Lord of the Rings, a lot more actual real places, so you're incorporating a lot more actual fake things on top of real things, when it's of course a lot easier to incorporate fake things with fake things. So. But yeah, so really to sum up why the Avatar, the original movie, was such a huge success was its spectacle, and I remember distinctly being so excited to watch it on DVD, and watching it on DVD and then immediately being disappointed because I realized how much of the thrill was the spectacle. And when you see the movie for just the plot and you don't get the full vastness of how crazy good the movie looks on a smaller screen, it doesn't seem that special,
Well, that's with most movies, I think.
Well,
when one relies on spectacles this much, it really has an impact for viewing experiences.
That's fair.
So, like, the Transformers movies are a perfect example of that, where they are really impressive to watch in theaters, but if you take them out of the theater context, they become just kind of indifferent.
Yeah.
Entertainment.
And you appreciate it, but you don't feel wowed by it.
Yeah,
it's like you turn off your brain to watch it.
It doesn't have the impact when you take it out of the theater context. I guess that kind of demands the question: is it important to watch movies that don't have anything to offer outside the theater context?
That is a great, and I wonder about that because there's a lot of times where I will pass on a movie not because I don't want to see it, but because I don't think it's worth seeing in theaters. I didn't think there was anything special about it.
Right.
You could make the argument for a lot of animated movies because it's animated, you already have that disconnect of not like feeling the need to be immersed in it. When it's something as live action, being immersed in it is a lot more valuable. It's kind of hard to be immersed in a true animated movie, not like a live action version of an animated movie.
Right. I think one example that you'd probably be able to speak to, Alex, of a movie that really benefits from being seen in a theater is A Quiet Place.
I didn't see that one in theaters.
Wesley was the one.
We watched it.
Yeah,
we watched it at
Wesley,
home, and that was still terrifying, though.
Wesley talked very highly of the theater experience, of how the immersion of that was crazy because you feel like it was also part of your job to be quiet as well. And
having a quiet theater.
Yeah, that must have been nice. A true quiet place. Wow. But yeah, he said that he was just totally immersed and like on the edge of his seat. And yeah, I think I was thinking in the back of my head, there was another movie that kind of had the same effect for me, and that was Ready Player One. A lot of Ready Player One was leaning towards its spectacle, and I knew about it being a movie about being immersed in a virtual reality. I feel like it was only fair to witness it in a theater setting, and I was glad it did, because honestly it was a spectacle. It was super cool to watch, and it was fun in those moments, but I can already tell you that if I would watch it on DVD, I would immediately remember it for liking it less than I do currently. I'm kind of like containing that experience for what it was and enjoying the movie probably a little bit higher than I would if I actually rewatched it, Right.
Was that movie also supposed to be fairly impressive in a 3D experience?
I don't remember it being marketed or made that way. I remember, at least from my experience, a lot of the talk just being about it being compared to the book.
Okay.
It would have been nice if it, that would have been a very good opportunity for them to go for 3D, because that's also like animated but sort of in a realistic sense.
Yeah, and I know they did 3D, but I don't recall them doing anything special about the 3D experience. Like, I'm pretty sure it was the same process as any movie that you see in 3D now. I could be wrong, but I could be wrong, but I literally remember hearing zero about the 3D experience being anything better for that movie, or in production about how it was going to be better in 3D, because sometimes you'll have movies that's like, there's going to be reasons to watch this in 3D, they'll try to promote that because they're putting the extra investment specifically for 3D, so they're going to promote the fact that you should watch this in 3D because we put more work into the 3D aspect of this movie. And I didn't hear any of that, and I followed pretty decently the coverage of that leading up to the movie because I was very interested in it.
Sure.
So, and I'd never heard that. So, and it's actually, come to think of that, it's been a while since we've heard a movie talk about the 3D experience being something special for a movie.
Yeah, I think John Carter was supposed to be something specific about it, but that didn't do well in regular theaters, let alone 3D.
Yeah. So
that's another reason why you should also have a good story along with the effects, the visual effects.
Yeah. So, with all that being said, now that we've kind of talked about the first movie, why it's at the place it is, why it's the top grossing, and all these factors, and what it did for the industry, now we're kind of left wondering, no one was thinking after, because the movie was very standalone. There was nothing really there was no cliffhangers. It was very set in stone. It was also a long movie, if I recall. I don't know the exact runtime, but I know that it was like a 2.5+ hour movie. Which seems very justified by its nature and and its production. So now, basically, we're faced with not one sequel, but actually currently 4 sequels, which seems ludicrous to most.
Yeah.
A little bit.
And anyone other than Star Wars or Marvel announcing a movie before their next movie has come out. Well, I mean, I guess they're kind of justified because Avatar is the most, maybe not the most profitable, but like the highest grossing movie of all time.
Give it 4 movies though?
It does seem kind of hubristic.
Maybe like 2 movies would be.
Or even, hey, we're doing a sequel to Avatar, and we're working, like, if that does well, we'll continue making others. Like, even if you wanted to make them all at once, it would behoove them, I think, to really see how a sequel does.
I wonder if they're expecting it to do as well, if not better, than the original, because that's like, I don't know if they're shooting themselves in the foot for trying to go for like the highest thing that they've ever done and try and do better than that.
I don't think it's even remotely possible that it's going to do as well as the first one.
Well, here's the thing, is that its biggest asset, which we already discussed, it being a spectacle. Sure, for the first sequel, there'll be a little bit of that in play to see how different and how much more James Cameron has done with all the advancements and other technologies that we'll get into later. But we're talking about 4 movies here. Yeah. So the little advantage you are going to get from that one sequel is already going to be used up in that single movie, because we know with the other movies, they're going to be the same. So they're not going to be any more advanced than the first sequel. So then it really, really relies on the plot. It cannot be copy-paste anymore. It cannot be something that we've seen before. It's got to be something really engaging and really fresh to actually warrant these movies and for warrant to people come back. Because here's the crazy thing, I already mentioned how they're being filmed back to back. Currently the production, as far as I can tell, started in September of 2017, and they filmed both the Avatar 2 and the Avatar 3 back to back, and these are already being done, and they're scheduled for release for 2020 in December, and December in 2021. So they're doing Christmas to Christmas, and he says that James Cameron said that he really wanted these movies to be like able to be seen close together. And then during those, acquiring the funding from those sequels, basically, and the money that they made off of those, they'll be then going immediately into production for the next 2 movies, which will be released as of right now. I suspect it will change, for December of 2024 and December of 2025. And so we're looking at 4 movies in the span of 5 years for Avatar. And we are looking at 2 movies being filmed back to back, which is crazy, and it's a crazy risk because as we are now talking about how the hype levels are not exactly there. It's been 10 years since the last one. People exactly haven't been like clamoring for a sequel. Right. I'm sure you got the people who love Avatar who would love to see a sequel, but that being said, the general public isn't like, yeah, let's see a sequel. You know, like it didn't warrant the need for one.
Yeah, it might be a situation where, the new Avatar movie's out. I remember enjoying the last one.
Exactly.
I'd be willing to go see it, but like nobody's posting on r/Avatar being like, I can't believe that they haven't done a sequel yet.
Like with Star Wars, it's an entire fan base based around that, and also we have other stuff going off of it. I mean, we already talked about it in another podcast, but hearing that is coming back, because it's making a comeback. We've already had a couple of comebacks, but it came back again, and we're all excited to see like the next story. But with Avatar, I don't know if they have as much of a strong fan base to go off of that, because also Star Wars is a much bigger thing,
right?
And
got a lot more lore.
It's so much more.
I think the benefit that Star Wars has that is kind of elusive to Avatar is that Star Wars is also a spectacle, and it's also like each series that's come out has, well, maybe not the newer ones as much, but the original trilogy and the prequels were also groundbreaking in their special effects, but there's still something about Star Wars that speaks to people on an emotional level rather than just like the spectacle. Like you have the spectacle, but you also have the foundation underneath it, which I think is lacking from what I understand. Star
Wars is one of the go-to movies when explaining the good versus evil stereotype movie plotline perfectly. They did the classic good versus evil storyline almost to a T,
right?
And now people try to get more complicated with that, which is risky and can either pay off hugely or be just confusing and then just totally fall in the trash, But so one of the first things that we think of, well, Avatar is going to have sequels and lots of sequels. The first thing, obviously, with Avatar having the reputation of the highest-grossing movie of all time, you would think that it's a money grab. But I have two big reasons why I believe that it's not a money grab. First off, James Cameron said himself that when he originally came up with the plot for Avatar, even when realizing he'll still have to shovel it for technology-wise, he realized that this is not a story that could be told in one movie. Kind of sounds like Star Wars, honestly, and his whole thing. When literally, when George Lucas thought of the original Star Wars storyline, it's over the span of 6 movies.
Yeah.
You know, and that also sounded pretty crazy about the fact that he wanted to do this crazy movie in a genre at that point. This is a little bit different aspect than Avatar, but in a genre that exactly wasn't very prolific at that time.
Wasn't known for making money.
Exactly.
And he wanted to, and he did decide to number it the way he did, but when the original came out, the studio was like, we can't really market it as episode 4. People are going to be confused, so we're just going to call it Star Wars, and we're going to go from there.
Yeah.
And that's how that went.
And with Star Wars, what's crazy about that is that was obviously one of the most hyped movies of all time. You know, when that, as far as like, not Star Wars, the second, like the following up to Star Wars. With the amount of hype, they could have basically told George Lucas, we'll fund all 5 movies now, you know, but they didn't. They waited for each movie to be finished and to come out before they funded the next one.
Right.
With this one, and obviously that's the safer route, you know. No matter how good of a bet seems, you still want to like wait to see the proof in the pudding. With this one, all these movies have already been funded. In fact, the first 2 movies, the first 2 sequels for Avatar, they've invested $1 billion between the 2 movies, which is an insane amount of money put into movies, and we've never really seen that kind of money thrown at movies before. I think the highest movies that we've seen is really the Avengers movies, you know, which those clock in
I don't think those are the most expensive movies.
I think one of the more recent ones that I can recall, but
let me keep going. I'm going to look at some.
But basically, the 2 points that I wanted to make is that James Cameron, when realizing the story, similar to Star Wars, he realized it can't be told into one, so we wanted to make a proof of concept being the first one that could stand alone, and then with its success, have the legitimacy to make more movies. So now that he's done that, now he wants to tell his full story, which he said originally was going to be 3 extra movies, which now needs to be 4 extra movies, as he's decided that he wants to tell it properly. So that part sounds a little less crazy now that you put that in perspective. The other part, obviously, being the money. If this was a money grab, then we wouldn't see the back-to-back filming with this type of money, and we wouldn't see the funding before these future movies even come out. James Cameron has placed his bets on these being a success, and I almost really enjoy that because I always appreciate movies when they're filmed back-to-back. They seem to be more coherent, and they usually seem to be they usually make better trilogies, you know. And on top of that, I feel like it ups the ante for the people working on the film. And they know that not only does this sequel has to be a hit, because this 3rd movie is happening whether we like it or not. So if the sequel sucks, they still have a 3rd movie that they still have to make. So the pressure is on them not just to make the next Avatar, but to make the next 2 Avatars, meaning that they need to make this a success. And I think that's going to really provide the, I shouldn't say encouragement, the pressure that's needed to provide a really epic trilogy, you know.
No, I get that.
So adjusted for inflation, so funnily enough, Avatar is the most expensive movie ever made, clocking in at $478.8 million.
Damn.
With an additional, I don't know if the marketing is included in that, but they spent $150 million on the marketing as well.
Wow.
Second was Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides.
Wow.
$444.
That's unfortunate.
I think we talked about that a little bit.
You mentioned those numbers a long time ago.
They did make their money back.
Oh, really?
Their worldwide gross was $1 billion.
I think I'm talking about Dead Men Tell No Tales.
Oh, yes. Okay.
At World's End, $348. They made $1 billion.
Wow.
Avengers: Age of Ultron at 340.
Wow.
So that's up there.
That's probably the one I was thinking of.
Yeah, with 1.5 essentially as their gross. Force Awakens 314. Yeah.
So that's crazy. So split that $1.5 billion. We're looking at a $500 million budget per movie. And even though that's technically what they'd be valued at, it's kind of, because they're being filmed back to back, it doesn't really justify how much money is being put into this, because when you film it back to back, you are saving money in a lot of aspects. So really there is technically being more money put into it than just a solid $500 million per movie. But that being said, this easily pushes it being the most expensive movies ever created, and that alone should be noted for attention, you know. So the fact that this amount of money is being invested beforehand, that makes the stakes super high. And I feel like typically the movies that do best is one where the pressure is stacked on, you know, because I feel like when you have the success and it seems like sequels just like, oh, just do it again, that's when they always fail. You know, I feel like when they're put out a challenge of like, okay, well, you have to, like, Force Awakens is a great example. It's like, you've got to follow up these movies. You got to bring something new, but you got to keep it like similar, and all these challenges, and they really had to put their heads down to make this. And it was successful, you know, with a lot of like pressure put onto it. And then after that was successful, then they were able to loosen up a little bit with more mixed results.
I mean, I wouldn't say that the pressure always does make it so
I mean, obviously
better.
not, but
like Age of Ultron, it was done by Joss Whedon, who did the first one, and it was...
No, that's a good example, yeah.
But I feel like the pressure wasn't as... I mean, obviously you have to try to live up to the expectations of the previous movie and meet it, but I feel like the event... I could be getting this wrong. I could be misremembering the hype levels at the time. I'm not sure that... I have an accurate
I remember not being excited by the promotional stuff.
Okay, that's fair.
I remember already feeling not great about the movie before going to see it, to which I was actually right in my thoughts about it, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
I will say that fan expectations are one thing, but money expectations is a whole nother ball game. And I think that that's a much more threatening battle to face.
Right.
So I feel like that's going to be a much more, again, not encouraging, because it's not like a happy, like, yeah, do your best. Like, no, it's a more of a threatening thing than anything. But hey, it's still
you really should make this somehow come back.
Yeah.
Right.
So I basically, based off of those things, this does not look like the recipe that we've seen for cash grabs in the past. You know. And like James Cameron, you know, similar to other trilogies and like sagas that we've seen, has a story that he's wanted to tell all the time, and this is what he set out to do. So it's not him because Avatar was a success, oh, I should think of more stuff to do. Like, this was the plan all along.
It's not a studio movie. It's a creative.
Yeah.
You know.
And this is one of his, like this is his true baby. Because, you know, you see other projects that he's worked on, and they're like other people's, you know, properties and things of that nature.
Yeah.
You know, see Titanic being number 2, obviously that's based off of a real-life event. And Avatar is the first one that's really his own creation. So this is very special to him. So he's got a lot of incentive to make this, like, big, you know?
Do you think that he's going to run afoul of the sort of George Lucas effect? Of being kind of fully in charge of his own own ship, as it were? That
is definitely a valid point to make. I'm going to touch on that a little bit when I talk about James Cameron's reputation, especially compared to other directors.
Sure.
Before we get more into the bigger picture of everything, I want to talk briefly about what has been talked about that's going to be actually in these sequels, you know, because we're saying what's going to be super important with these, that's going to be like the number one reason why it's going to be a success this time around, not because of its spectacle. Not a ton has been said about the plot, but what has been said by James is that it is going to be revolved around family, and it's going to be revolved around multi-generational family. And what I think it's important to note here is that the entire cast is coming back. All the original people, because they're still on contract for these sequels.
Except for the people who died in the first movie, right?
No, actually.
What? They're coming back?
Yeah.
Yikes.
That has not explained why, but
Clones.
yeah. So
time travel, aliens.
Cloning.
Yeah.
Cloning
so
aliens.
that's kind of like a weird spoiler, I guess. But I mean, I'm sure in the trailers they'll show those characters, so I'm sure it's not really a true spoiler. But yeah, so the people who quote unquote died in the first Avatar movie coming back, both the bad guy and the scientist girl, like the redhead. I'm forgetting her name.
Oh, she died? I can't remember.
Yeah.
I remember the bad guy dying.
Yeah, but they're both coming back, and of course with lots of new actors. For new characters.
I just wish that some movies just leave people dead, you know? Give them a break.
I can agree.
They keep bringing people
I am
back.
interested to see what the reason is.
Let
for
them
this.
die.
Yeah.
Just let them lay down and die.
So James Cameron says this in quotes, "At the center of each of our 4 movies will be the Sully family. Each sequel will play as a standalone movie. Each movie's story will come to its own conclusion. However, when looked at as a whole, the journey across all 4 movies will create an even larger connected epic saga for audiences around the world."
I was going to say, getting even more Star Wars vibes from this.
I know, right? Which isn't a bad thing, to be honest.
So it's going to be the family screwing up the galaxy again. Different genre. Different storyline.
Emotional baggage of the new Galaxy family.
And even though the majority of the power of creating a spectacle has already passed, he does have some pretty major plans for these new movies, especially exploring different parts of Pandora when it comes to other tribes and new environments within Pandora as a planet, mostly including an underwater portion of the movie, which is not going to be a cameo. It is a huge portion, and there's been a lot of technology directly made for this portion of however big a portion this is going to be in the movie. It's unsaid, but it's not going to be just a scene, you know. And
James Cameron is known for his passion for underwater exploration and such, so that should be interesting.
I mean, Titanic was at the bottom of the water by the end, so.
Well, he's known for not necessarily in movies, but he I think either before or after, or like as part of his research for Titanic, he spent a lot of time in
underwater
submersibles exploring the wreck.
Okay.
That's right?
I don't know.
Like he was.
That'd be cool if he did. I don't know.
He spent a lot of time in like deep sea, like exploration.
It sounds right,
like the
but
beginning of the movie of Titanic.
Yeah,
that's what they were doing.
It sounds right. I can't say factually. But
yeah, like I think he's actually like heavy into deep sea exploration.
He's got a lot of really intense hobbies outside of film.
They mentioned that in a TV show called Feature Man, which is like a super weird show.
Very
where they
bizarre show.
Yeah, where he had like they have to get something, but it's at the bottom of a giant well that he has inside of his house. He's like, why does he have this? It's like, well, it's James Cameron. It's like, oh, okay.
He also mentioned that we're expecting to see volcanic-like scenes as well, which is very interesting. We don't see too many of that.
Water,
in movies.
Volcanic. Is this turning into Avatar?
Well,
Last Airbender?
That's what I was thinking. Is that I feel like each sequel maybe will explore a different like element. You know.
I was gonna say this is starting to sound more like a video game.
We'll start like calling the Avatar movies by their elements. So like, the lava sequel. You know, like the lava one. Oh,
Earth, fire, water.
Ice one.
Yeah, the ice one. But honestly, that could all be very well cool. And he said in quote, "You crap," phrasing there, yourself with your mouth wide open is what he's saying the reaction will be. I was like, all right.
Good to know. Thank you. I don't think he actually wants people to do that in the theaters.
I guess I'll pack my Depends.
Yeah, he talks very highly of it. So, and to be honest, when it comes to spectacles, James Cameron hasn't exactly let us down, you know. Not just in Avatar, but with Titanic, you know, there was, I think they,
I'll be honest,
he almost made it full scale, the whole ship. I think it was a very small percentage less that it was. Like, they were, I remember when, a long time ago, about hearing about Titanic, the movie, when they're making the ship, I think they originally proposed, I want to say, half-sized for the ship, but then he went for, like, at least 3/4 the size, which was like
insane.
Yeah, like an exorbitant more amount of money for this, and he had very particular reasons for doing it about why this size ship would give a certain result.
Did he have it on land
I honestly don't. I'm pretty sure.
See, I don't know why. I'm just like, that thing's going to sink down.
Well, the thing is
somehow.
that we think the Titanic is a really big ship. Honestly, compared to today's ships, it's not very big.
Okay.
So do keep that in mind. The Titanic is a big ship, no doubt, but compared to like, say, like a cruise liner, like it's
compared to like the Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, it doesn't stack up with today's ships.
Is it bad that the first thing I thought of was a helicarrier, which isn't even real? Yeah. Oh well.
That's true. Yeah. So that's like some of the stuff that we know about what's going into the next one, and what's actually going to be in it. Obviously, a lot of it's still kept under wraps, and we really won't know much till we see the trailers and maybe posters or just any sort of promotional aspects, because we see not even a photo of official stuff, maybe behind the scenes stuff, sure, but we've never seen anything released about these new sequels, so it's very shrouded in mystery at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're able to keep it so shrouded in mystery, considering they're doing 4 movies in one time span, and they must have been working on it for quite a while now. Mm-hmm. Do you think you'd see like at least pictures of James Cameron behind a camera with like Avatar slogan in the background or something?
Yeah. So yeah, there's not too much to go in that, and I not want to base this whole conversation off, but I think it was worth mentioning what we do know about the upcoming films so far. What I do want to move into now is James Cameron himself and his reputation. Let's go into the technology. I mentioned that he did the motion capture and the like 3D advancements for the original Avatar. In this one, the 2 biggest ones that we're seeing, almost very similar. He's making very specific and brand new technology cameras revolving around motion capture underwater. So he's charting new territory with like motion capture live action has not been done underwater before. And he had to make specific cameras for it, and the actors had to do rigorous training and I think they said 6 months worth of training to not only to be able to hold their breath long underwater, but to also be able to perform underwater, which is crazy when you think about that. Like props to these actors and actresses, man. Like that's.
I wouldn't want to do that.
I was like, is this above my pay grade? Like that seems like a lot. Like I know people go through like some crazy physical transformations.
But when it comes to like not breathing, I think it's on another level.
Yeah. So that's crazy, and it really shows that like. I think that's proof that it's not going to be just a cameo scene. Like, there's going to be a good portion of this movie that's going to be underwater, and it's going to be crazy amazing because he's put so much extra work into just making it as lifelike as possible.
Mm-hmm. And it's not going to be an Aquaman situation where it's kind of like it looks like they're kind of underwater, but like it's a little bit.
You can tell
no one
that
swims like that underwater.
It's kind of like space, like there technically isn't sounds in space, and with the exception of a few movies, most movies with space have sounds. So because it's like
and it's jarring when we don't hear sound in space when we're watching a movie. We're just like, why is it so
wasn't
quiet
the one with
here?
Sandra Bullock the one that didn't
Gravity? That one was terrifying just because it was so quiet.
And they actually they kind of used that to their advantage of being the contrast to the majority of movies having sound. So
did they have that for Interstellar too? I feel like they did for some parts. I don't know if it was all of it.
I can't remember. I've only seen that movie once.
Maybe The Martian too.
But also, in addition to that, because it's pretty well documented the fact that he's been doing this underwater stuff. But I think that something that's not being talked about a lot that he's developing for this movie is that he's working based off of his, he's got ownerships when it comes to technology, but he also has connections when it comes to projector technology. Mm-hmm. He's making the first ever Hollywood film that's going to be shown in 3D without glasses. So they have some sort of laser technology with these types of projectors, and obviously you can only have them at certain theaters, but he says that it's a crucial sticking point for him, that these movies will be able to be shown in 3D without glasses. Like, that's the future that he wants to push, is 3D movies without glasses, and these are going to pave the way for it.
Okay.
That's crazy, you know?
Yes, he's insane.
Yeah. And if he does it right, then it's once again going to revolutionize the 3D market for movies. And just it might, because it could be, obviously it's going to be expensive, and we'll see how much work it actually takes to properly do that to its effect. But once again, we're going to see that boundary being pushed of immersion, and it's going to make people want to see the Avatar sequel solely for that unique experience. You know,
I mean, I don't know if I'd want to spend like $60 to watch something like that.
Who said $60?
I'm thinking of a number. You know,
I doubt it's going to.
3D is already expensive enough. I think like a select theater with high grade technology like that.
I would highly doubt it would be more than double the normal ticket price. I don't even think it would be that. I think it might be like 50% more. Is what I'm thinking.
For a theater that's specially equipped with a laser projector.
But it's not as a rare thing as I'm making it seem.
Okay.
Like just a certain company that produces these types of projectors. Like it's not like where you need like a specialized theater or something like that. It's just the company that he works with that makes these projectors, and depending on where that company can bring their projectors is depending on where you can see this movie in the no glasses 3D version. So definitely going to follow up on that and see how that progresses, but that could change so many things, you know, and that could, especially for people like you who wear glasses, that could make it a much better experience for you guys, especially because glasses on glasses never is great.
No, it doesn't work.
Yeah,
it doesn't. It sucks.
It could also make the 3D illusion truly more immersive if done correctly. Like I'm hoping that I can't imagine that it would be if James Cameron is pushing this. I would hope that it wouldn't be sacrificing the actual immersion effect for the sake that you don't have to wear glasses
or the fidelity of the image.
Yeah. Perhaps. So
I'm kind of in that scenario where it is successful and it is something that brings a lot of people to the theaters. I can see the same thing happening to that technology as it did to like 3D in general because of the Avatar release, where you just have a rash of poorly implemented 3D effects just being kind of like continued to pasted on to these movies that like don't benefit from it because it's not like an intentional aspect that's wrapped into the production of the thing.
That's one of my like least favorite things. And a lot of when 3D was making a comeback, a lot of especially anime movies were doing exactly that. And I would call those the very I came up with a word for it earlier and I can't remember now, but just very like corny, just like obvious blatant uses of 3D, just like a scene that was made specifically just to, oh by the way 3D, woo, but and like the best movies that are in 3D are the ones that don't even try for 3D. It just makes you naturally more immersed, and that's one of the things that made Avatar was so great, is that there was never a moment that you would like, oh, the scene was made specifically to utilize the 3D, it was just like, I feel immersed in this, and this is awesome. It just feels like this movie was made to be utilized by 3D in its entirety as a movie should be, and not just like, here's a few scenes that's going to really, display the 3D technology. But overall, the movie really isn't going to benefit from 3D. Like, Avatar is different in that aspect.
That's kind of a tangent. You guys, I can't remember if you guys talked about it. You talked about the movie on the podcast. I can't remember if you talked about this aspect specifically, but one thing I noticed about Into the Spider-Verse was there was a very strange 3D kind of blue and red thing going on in the 2D, the regular version of the movie. I'm curious if someone took a pair of 3D glasses and wore them while they were watching the regular version of the movie, if it like changes how you view the movie at all.
I thought it was just because of the Spider-Verse the effect that it had when they had the whole.
It could be purely aesthetic, but I would be very intrigued to see what that looks like. That could be cool. I really want to know. It
just seemed like it was glitching, honestly, like for like artistic purposes.
It could be. I feel like
that'd be an interesting thing to look into.
I feel like it was more prevalent than. I mean, it could be wrong. I've only seen it once that I recall, but I think I own it. But I feel like it was like a continuous thing rather than and like I forgot that it was there a lot of the time, but I feel like it was prevalent in the entire movie and not just in specific scenes. But again, I could be mistaken about that.
Maybe you should try it.
Maybe I should. Where can I get some?
I mean, I will definitely begin to watch the movie again. I will not complain about watching that movie again. So the next thing I want to move on from, now that we've addressed the technology, is, and this was what I spent like an hour writing down for, was stats compared to other prolific movie directors. And so what I did is I took the top 5 grossing movie directors for film, and they come out as this. Number 5 is David Yates, who has grossed from his movies $1.3 billion.
Okay. What did he do?
That's domestic. I think worldwide it says it's 5.3 billion. That sounds more right. David Yates is responsible for Harry Potter.
Okay.
Then you have 4 being James Cameron, and in total he's done 6.2 billion. Michael Bay, who obviously is responsible for Transformers, among many other things.
He's responsible.
Yeah, responsible for
Bad Boys.
Who has done 6.4 billion, so a small difference from James Cameron. And right ahead of that also is Peter Jackson, obviously responsible for Lord of the Rings, who is at 6.5 billion. And number 1 by a big margin, simply by the amount of movies that he's done, is Steven Spielberg with over $10 billion.
Oh, yeah.
One thing that I thought was interesting, though, before then just putting up these solid numbers out there, was figuring out the amount of movies that these people have directed compared to those numbers. So I went on to IMDb, or I always get the
IMDb.
Yeah. And I looked up all the movies, how many movies that they were given credit to as a director. So now put with those numbers, Steven Spielberg has indeed done $10 billion, but over 58 movies, whereas Peter Jackson has done 6.5 with only 23 movies. So per movie, Peter Jackson is way ahead of Steven Spielberg. In fact, this trend follows with Michael Bay, who has done... Michael Bay is in a very similar boat as Steven Spielberg, as he's only done 6.4 billion over 57 movies. Meanwhile, David Yates has done... Meanwhile, David Yates has done 5.3 billion over the course of 27 movies. Peter Jackson, like I said, had done 6.5 over 23. And also falling in line with this, James Cameron has done 6.2 only over 23 movies. So basically, Michael Bay and Steven Spielberg have basically gotten that amount of money simply by the amount of big productions that they've worked on.
I almost think that looking at the amount of money a movie has made is less interesting to me than the quality of the movies made.
And that is my next point, which I'm going to get to. Because after doing that as like an interest, because I thought the grossing was interesting simply because James Cameron has the top 2 spots. So I was like, okay, how does he stack on overall with other, directors who have made a massive amount of money? So that's the main reason why I did that, and I was interested because I know James Cameron hasn't made nearly as many of movies as say Steven Spielberg has. However, he's been in the business for just as long. So I was wondering, that quality, for money, and per movie, James Cameron has done very great work compared to the others. In fact, he's done the same amount as Peter Jackson, and only trails by 300 million. Which, when we're talking billions, isn't that much. So now that we have that perspective, what I did is that I went to Rotten Tomatoes and went to...
I'm gonna have to stop you right there. Rotten Tomatoes is not a good metric for quality of movies, just because the number that they're looking at isn't... it's not an aggregate score. It's... Is the average score above 60%? Does that make sense? So like,
so you got people, yeah.
So like, if 100% of the reviews are above 60%, it has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I feel like Metacritic is a better example.
And that's fair. I did go with Rotten Tomatoes simply because it kind of backs up the successful rate of the movies rather than just the pure rating. Because just because something was rated really good does not mean it was successful.
Right.
So that's...
Is the argument you're making that people should be interested in these movies because they're likely to be successful, or that they're going to be objectively good?
Well, I think that Rotten Tomatoes incorporates both, is my argument, basically.
Okay.
But regardless, that's what I ended up using for. I could follow it up with Metacritic, but I decided to go with Rotten Tomatoes.
Okay.
And if I had more time, I would have done both. But with Rotten Tomatoes, I looked at all the directors and all the ratings that they were given in a director role, and averaging all those numbers out, David Yates. From worst to least, worst to best, we had Michael Bay with an average score of 36.2.
Oof.
Not great, and that's mostly due to Transformers. Most of the Transformers movies performing 17% or less, which is horrific. In fourth place, we have David Yates with an average score of 68.8. In third, we have Steven Spielberg with an average score of 76.3, which is honestly impressive with the amount of movies that he's done to keep that reputable of a score. Then in second is Peter Jackson with an average score of 76.6. And then first, James Cameron with 76.7. So James Cameron, I mean, obviously just barely above Peter Jackson, is technically the highest out of the average of those ratings from all the movies that he's been. And I want to clarify, specifically based off of director roles, because if you look in all the things for some of these directors, they've done a lot of producing, they've done a lot of some of them even acting, and like for instance, James Cameron was technically responsible for partly producing one of the I think it was the Piranha 3D movie, which got a horrific 6% on Rotten Tomatoes. So only because we're basing off of director specifically, only roles that had them as director were those scores counted for in this graph. So just so it's clear what those stats are based off of. But basically, by those metrics, James Cameron is, no surprise, one of the top directors out there, and technically number one in Rotten Tomatoes ratings, and number 4 when it comes to straight up grossing, but then one of the top 2 when it comes to average per movie grossing. So he's got some of the best stats in the game, no surprise, but I thought it was very good to follow that up with some actual research and not just saying that because that's what seems right, because I think that there's a lot of movies that people forget about that people have worked on a long time ago that didn't work out so well to get to where they are now. But I think that track record was important. Also noteworthy is that James Cameron has worked on a lot of phenomenal sequels, which is something that is a little bit harder to capture for some directors. Obviously, David Yates did a good job with the majority of the Harry Potter movies, but not so much as we're now seeing from the
prequel.
Yeah, the
movies?
prequel ones, which I believe he's in. I'm pretty sure that he's doing. But yeah. It's so funny because Michael Bay's top performer, and I'm looking at it, was Transformers: Dark of the Moon, which in itself grossed $1.1 billion.
Well, the Transformers movies do really well in China, which is one of the reasons why they continue to make those movies.
Gotcha.
Because critically, they get panned all the time, and they do fairly well domestically, but not nearly well enough to justify, continued. Though apparently Bumblebee was supposed to be pretty good.
Bumblebee was good.
Still want to see that.
Yeah. However, unfortunately, in related news to that, they are going back to making another sequential Transformers movies.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. Just
stop.
Oh, really? Yeah. Everyone kind of facepalmed when they heard that news, including myself. But yeah, so basically, rather than just saying that James Cameron is one of the best directors of all time, actually researching it and clarifying the fact that yes, he is in fact one of the best directors of all time,
most successful.
Yeah, and I would put him in the top 3. I think that you could make a lot of other statistics, and I could do a lot more research about this, of other aspects, using other sources and other angles to what makes a director great. But as far as a movie's success, I think that James Cameron has a very high percentage of producing successful movies. And when we see something that is being invested in this highly, and something that is this personal to him, that he believes in, I think that this has nothing but the recipe for an absolute hit, and I see no reason, despite some people saying that the sequels seem unwarranted, I don't see anything here that would clue to a reason why these movies shouldn't be must-see movies,
I mean, I'll probably still see them most likely. If not in theaters, then on DVD.
I mean, especially when you got an attraction like the No Glasses 3D, I feel like everybody's at least going to want to try that out once,
It depends on if they're actually available or not.
I mean, that's true.
I would imagine we wouldn't get one of those.
Not up here, not in the north.
I think maybe in Boston.
Which isn't that far, to be honest.
No, but it's farther than I want to go to see a movie.
I tend to see a lot of movies.
Downtown Boston to watch
I tend to see a lot of big movies in IMAX these days, not in 3D, but just in IMAX because I like the extra big screen. Because I feel like that immersion is more generally effective than 3D immersion. Ironically, it's just a bigger screen. But the closest one for us is 50 minutes away.
Okay.
So, and that's in just outside Manchester.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to remember, but anyways, so like for me, like I'm already used to driving 50 minutes to seeing like a movie in like a bigger screen. I wouldn't mind driving an hour and a half to see in something of this spectacle. So
yeah. I mean, I guess if you were going to do a day trip of it, that'd be worth it.
Yeah.
But if, for instance, if we decided to do a spoiler cast, that would be pretty miserable.
Yeah, it's true.
That's saying if we did do a spoiler cast, I'm not driving.
As I drive an hour and a half there, watch the movie, drive an hour and a half back, and you can't talk about the movie the entire time.
It's nice seeing a movie that's 10 minutes away and only having to shut up for 10 minutes.
Also, being James Cameron is most likely going to be a 2.5 to 3 hour movie. So.
It's true. We got a lot to digest.
Oh, yeah, it would be a long day.
So yeah, that's most of what I have. Now we're just kind of final thoughts. But I just think that ultimately my point of this whole conversation is that I think that there should be a lot of hype around Avatar. Because like I said, I feel like all the signs point to not only this movie being successful, but if you had to make like a concoction for like the next big trilogy or saga, like out of anything that we've seen out here, like this is it. If anything could take down the popularity that is comic book movies. Like these Avatar movies could be it. I'm not saying I want that, but we haven't seen anything challenge that at all. Like even Harry Potter is failing to live up to its original hype. Star Wars is
it's not even Harry Potter anymore.
I mean, yeah, but but
I think that's part of its problem.
Yeah,
is we're making more Harry Potter movies, except it's not about Harry Potter at all.
Yeah.
And if the books had been marketed as like if they'd been titled something different, like if it wasn't Harry Potter X, if it was like, they might not have been as successful, but it would have made more sense. Like there would have been a better umbrella for them to be making these different movies. Where Star Wars is like, it's not Skywalker Saga, A New Hope.
Yeah.
And then we're making these other movies that have nothing to do with the Skywalkers.
Like instead of the Harry Potter, it could be like something Chronicles,
Yeah. And they're trying to kind of bring it back a bit.
When it comes down to it, as far as the highest grossing movies these days, the Marvel movies have constantly been breaking like weekend and opening records and things like that, and it have been trending higher and higher. And it's only a matter of time. Who knows? Maybe the next Avengers movie where we see it knocking on the doors of Titanic and potentially Avatar.
Quite possibly.
So. I know it's going to take a lot, but like it's definitely the closest we ever seen a franchise come to even reaching it.
Where does Endgame, or not Endgame? Where did Infinity War end up on the roster?
How much did Infinity War gross worldwide?
Here's a summary from Wikipedia. Worldwide, Avengers: Infinity War grossed $2,048,359,754
Came really close to Titanic. Came really close.
So
the film set records
okay, shut up.
in the highest
Stop.
opening weekend.
That's enough.
The fastest
Quiet.
gross.
Enough. Peace.
silence, woman. So I guess it depends on whether people feel more hyped for Endgame than they were for Infinity War.
Yeah.
Or if they or if like that, like the movie, if Infinity War and Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel have like gotten, like given it like a downward trend in terms of hype.
Well, the thing is that it's funny that you mentioned Ant-Man and the Wasp. Ant-Man and the Wasp grossed way higher than the original Ant-Man, despite having low hype. Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, when I was looking at the overall movie like grossing metrics, almost always the sequel grossed more than the original, despite its hype.
I mean, that I guess that makes sense because Marvel has kind of been doing the thing where they're introducing characters that people don't really care about, and like making them care about them. So basically, nobody knew, like nobody aside from comic book fans knew who Iron Man was before they made a movie about him, and like people knew the Incredible Hulk because he's the Incredible Hulk, and they'd already had a movie come out that involved him. But even that, I feel like, didn't do as well. But so Iron Man did really well.
Nobody knew who Guardians of the Galaxy were.
Right?
Yeah.
And that one just, knocked it out of the park. Not necessarily in terms of box office. I imagine the sequel did better.
Like critical acclaim.
So right here, and these like I just looked at the highest grossing Marvel movies, and the top 8 don't match hype levels whatsoever. So number 1 is Black Panther. Yes, it was hype, but far from the highest hype. Then you have Infinity War. Then you have the original Avengers.
Wait a second. If Black Panther made more than Infinity War, did it make, like, how close did it come to being
I'm looking up the exact number right now. Wait, why does it say that?
I don't know.
Oh, what? It's sorting it by domestic. What? Okay, that's not fair. Because worldwide, Black Panther only made 1.3. So, domestic-wise, it made 700, while Infinity only made 678. So, okay, prefacing this with the fact that which it seems like it matches up for the most point, ironically, except for Infinity War. Like, Infinity War seems to be the outlier as far as worldwide to domestic, as far as, like, levels, as far as ranking goes. So with that being said, domestically, Black Panther is number 1, Infinity War is number 2, number 3 is the Avengers, number 4 is the Avengers Age of Ultron, number 5 is Iron Man 3, number 6 is Captain America Civil War, number 7 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and number 8 is Spider-Man Homecoming. So there's a good amount of sequels in there that definitely didn't have, like Iron Man 3, like, sure, like, people were, like, excited.
Well, it was
also
the first movie after the first Avengers movie. Like,
right. People were super hyped about Iron Man post.
They were like,
Avengers.
what's next?
And Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, don't get me wrong, there was hype around it, but nothing like the press that was given around the first movie,
You think?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, because people left Guardians of the Galaxy highly satisfied, saying that you must see and must rewatch it. I personally watched it 3 times in theater. The second one, people said, like, it was good, but then, like...
But that's like anecdotal hype. It's like not hype leading up to the movie because I think that the reason why sequels do so much better is because you have the foundation that was built by the original.
That's fair.
And that's, hype leading up to the movie, like less so than word of mouth. Like I don't consider word of mouth to be hype necessarily. Like it can extend the tale of a movie.
Kind of like they did with Avatar.
Right. But oftentimes people are going to go see it pretty early on, like not based on reviews, not based on things that other people have said. If they're going to go see the movie anyway, or if they're planning on seeing the movie, they're going to go see it regardless of like who says they should.
Yeah, like if you know that you like the first one and there's another movie coming out, you're going to be like, well, I have to check it out now for the most part.
Do you think that, almost having that said, do you think that the next Avatar is almost guaranteed to break its original Avatar movie record?
I still don't think so.
You still don't think so?
It's still like so far away from the first movie, so I don't know.
And also, again, the reason that people saw the first one was because of its spectacle, and having seen that, I don't know that that's going to be enough to
push the second one?
Yeah, I especially if people are. I mean, not everyone is kind of, really invested in finding out information about these movies.
Right.
So people might not even know that they have 4 other movies planned for this series. But even then, I feel like they're gonna be like, oh, Avatar 2?
Yeah.
Maybe. So like, if it's good, like, I think it'll have the same kind of effect where it's like, it's gonna start off, I think it'll be fairly successful. I'm not sure if it's gonna make its money back, but I think it's gonna be fairly successful initially. But I don't think it's gonna like bust down the door.
It's not going to be consistent with its earnings because every like super high earning movie has been consistent and not just like dropped off immediately. You know, for the most part, I would imagine. I think the only ones that would say otherwise would be those Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Would be the only exception that I can think of.
I want to disagree with you because I feel like there are some pretty significant examples of that, but I would have to look it up because I feel like The Last Jedi had a pretty precipitous drop. Like
it definitely did.
It still did really well, like, you know, box office wise, but like after the first.
Well, I'm talking about like these top 10 grossing all-time movies.
Mm-hmm.
Those all made it to the top
like
10 list because they were consistent and not just had a crazy opening weekend.
Sure.
Like none of those movies made it into the top 10 by some crazy opening weekend record. Mm-hmm. It was all because it maintained its spot for more than just 2 weeks. You know.
That's fair. So I guess my point is that I don't know that a sequel to Avatar is going to do enough differently or better to like make an impression, because like when people tend to have like a skewed memory when it comes to how impressive something is.
Yeah.
So like if you go back and watch stuff that, I think video games are a better example than movies.
Oh, absolutely, because it's evolving way faster.
You have sort of a mentality of like, oh, this was super groundbreaking when it came out. It was like, man, this is almost photorealistic. And then you go back and watch it, you're like, oh god, this is horrible. or like you get these remasters and you're like this was really good when it came out, and you get the remaster that's like really like highly developed afterwards, and it's still not up to the same like you're like, oh yeah, this is how I remember it, but it's still not as good as, you know, other games that are coming out that are contemporaries.
One thing that this is reminding me of, not to cut you off, is that I think it's also it's a lot harder to impress people by spectacles than it used to be.
For sure.
As technology advances, the margins are becoming smaller and smaller as far as how much more realistic thing we can get, you know, because like as you've got the end goal here, there's a point, especially with CGI, where it's like a huge crazy spike of being like more realistic, but now we're getting like, now the parts that are being improved on are so detail oriented that it's not nearly as noticeable as like the past 2 decades.
The increments are getting much smaller.
So it's a lot harder to sell a movie based on spectacle alone. In fact, in a weird way, it's easier to market a movie that's not going on photorealism for spectacle. For example, Spider-Verse. That was a very creatively different looking movie, and I say that was a selling point on that movie.
And I think that Spider-Verse is one of those movies that's going to hold up a lot longer than a live action movie with heavy CGI elements is going to.
You're 100% right. And that's why we see, for instance, in like video games, like you mentioned, I think Wind Waker is a great example of something that's almost timeless with its graphics, despite it being very old, you know? And I remember it was funny when that came out, it was heavily criticized for its art style, but now people freaking love it, you know?
There's some revisionist history going on there.
Yeah. So yeah. But that's all I got, really. And it'll be very interesting to see how these pan out. And it'll be, I would imagine, by the end of this year, we will see some sort of official hype, based as far as like, not hype, like release as far as maybe like a poster or some official art or some official teaser or something. I feel like by the end of the year,
behind the scenes kind of,
because we've seen behind the scenes like pictures more or less, you know, like when he's talking about the underwater technology, like we've seen some footage of what they looks like when they're filming and things of that nature, but some actual, I think by the end of the year the Avatar will put out something specifically for promotional / hype reasons, and not just for, hey, behind the scenes work, look, we're actually working on the movie. Like, no, marketing stuff. We're going to start seeing marketing and like stuff put out for that by the end of this year is my prediction.
I mean, a year, because it comes out December of next year, right?
Yep.
So if it comes out, say, November or December of this year, a year's tale on marketing doesn't seem unrealistic to me.
Yep. So
still waiting on that name announcement for episode 9 though.
Still waiting.
Yeah,
So
I know, right? Or trailer, and I still think we're holding firm with the fact that we think that's going to be revealed after Avengers.
that's fair.
Yeah.
They only just finished up filming
Really?
on episode 9, so
A while ago, yeah.
like a few weeks back. So, I mean, fingers crossed that they're able to get everything done in time. But I
think they already- I think they already did the same thing with The Last Jedi, where they didn't have I think they may have had the title release first, and then they had a trailer drop on May the 4th. So it was much later than with The Force Awakens, where they had an entire year for when they dropped the first trailer, the teaser trailer, to when the movie came out.
Yeah, it won't be long before we start getting swarmed with Avatar sequel stuff. Because
oh God.
So put in comparison, they put in $100 million in advertising for the original Avatar in comparison to a $400 million budget. We're going to see at least double that, I would imagine, for this coming sequel, which is going to be, by comparison, I would imagine, I don't have the numbers on me, but I would imagine based off of budget-wise, this is going to be the biggest budget for also marketing movie that we've ever seen.
Quite possibly.
And I mean, especially with this amount of money riding on it, you kind of have to.
Yeah.
Like at this point, you have to spend money to make money.
You got to market the living hell out of this.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised if he spent upwards of $400 million in advertising for this, to be honest. Because we've seen that before. I mean, not on this scale, but we've seen movies almost spending more money on advertising than they have on actually making the movie. So we haven't seen that done to this scale. But I mean, if there's a movie to do it, I feel like this is the one.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Yeah, no, it's going to be very fascinating to see one way or the other, because it is going to be a time to remember, whether it is a huge flop, whether it is one of the most biggest letdowns ever, or whether it's one of the greatest new examples of success in film,
Yeah.
Either way, it's a story.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah. With that will conclude our episode. Thanks for watching / listening. Like I mentioned before, if you're listening, you can watch this on YouTube. And if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget, you can take this wherever you go on any music and podcast device. Podcast platform, rather. Also, feel free to check out our website at geekkind.tv. And make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms to keep updated on everything that we have, plus some bonus content as well. Thanks for joining us. And stay kind, geeks.
Inconceivable!